Hello there and welcome back to another video here on Wrist Watch Revival. My name is Marshall. Thank you so much for coming along. This time on the bench, well, we've got something a little different than what we normally work on. This is a watch that my aunt handed me and she said, "Can you restore this for me?" It belonged to my grandmother. So yes, of course, I'm going to take a shot at it. And as you can see, it needs quite a bit of work. There's some damage to it. For starters, there's one of the indexes, one of those rubies there that normally goes at the 9 o'clock hour there is just floating around in the case. There's a couple of the diamond insets missing. And as you can see, it's just in generally kind of worn shape. There's a lot of dirt in between the jewels on the outside, as well as in the bracelet. It just hasn't been serviced or cleaned in forever, probably, 50 plus years. So we may have a bit of a project on our hand. I don't know what movement is inside of this watch, and we're going to have to find that out and see if we can get it running as well. But these are really the special projects that come across my bench every once in a while. Something that is meaningful to, well, in this case, she's not technically my aunt. Do you have like an uncle or an aunt that you call that, but they're really your parents' friends? That's what this woman is to me. But I mean, she's been a part of my life for, 25 years, and I consider her a family member. And at any rate, this was her grandmother's. So this thing probably dates to somewhere in the 40s. I'm assuming. It's a little hard to say. Whew, that came right out. And you can see there's a lot of dirt underneath the where the bracelet meets the case as well. Yeah. So this thing is going to need a thorough bath for sure. And I'm hoping that that'll get it looking better. But also, of course, mission critical here is to get the dang thing running again. But yeah, these are just the really kind of special projects because, these watches, sure, they have some value, but these types of watches have a lot more value than just monetary. And bringing it back to a state where my aunt can enjoy it again and even wear it sometimes would be awesome. So here's our first problem. The most obvious is that the index at 9 has fallen out. But it looks like I should be able to put it back in. I'm going to need some type of glue. And yeah, as I look closely here, there's a couple of these diamonds that are missing as well at the, the 2 o'clock and the 10 o'clock positions there. I'm hoping that these are somewhere in the case or something because I'm not really sure where I'm going to find them or how I'm going to replace them otherwise. I may just have to live with it. There's only so much I can do with these restorations. First things first, though, we'll just take the hands off. This one has a sub-seconds hand there. You can see it's not a central seconds like you see on a lot of watches. Okay, but this movement did just pop out of the case, and it looks like, well, it's at least attempting to run. This watch was wound up all the way and wouldn't unwind, and as you can see, it kind of comes to a stop. So there's something going on with it, but I will say that the fact that the balance is moving at all is pretty good. Right? That means that at least the parts are there, the spring's in place. This is a non-shock protected balance, so it's not uncommon to have the balance staff broken on these. If the watch takes a big hit, the balance staff is a very thin piece of metal holding on a relatively large amount of mass, and that can shift dramatically and actually break it. Now, modern watches have shock protection systems on them that really do a great job of preventing that, but this is an old watch and they didn't have that yet. Okay, so the dial comes off and we're going to have to address that later. But for now, we can get cracking on this movement and see if there's any obvious signs of damage or anything like that. As usual with these type of watches, we do something that you really don't see, certainly not now, but even normally it's fairly rare to see what we're about to do, which is we are going to completely disassemble this movement, like every screw, every spring, every part, and down to its barest components. And then we'll completely wash them and then reassemble it from scratch. It's kind of weird because when you think about other things in your life, like electronics or your car or gosh, almost anything, it is not the way that it works, right? If something on your car breaks, you fix that one part. With electronics, it's usually just a situation where if it's even going to be repaired at all, you just replace it. And with these, that's not the case. And there's something really satisfying about that process. I hope you find it that way too. Okay, so I let down the mainspring and there was power in the mainspring. Again, it wouldn't unwind. And that signals to me that there's an issue either with the mainspring itself or with power going through the train of wheels. And so that'll be one of the places that I look first. In fact, I'm just going to check right now. Yeah, so look, after I take the pallet fork out, there's nothing holding that back. So the mainspring should unwind. And as you can see, it does. I put some wind in it and it is unwinding. But I will say that it is not unwinding at the speed that you would expect. And right here, I just noticed there's also a screw missing here on this bridge for the escape wheel. So that is a problem. Now, it looks like it wasn't affecting, like that's not the issue with the watch. I mean, unless the screw's floating around in the case somewhere, which we've seen that before on the channel. But assuming that that's not the case, that wasn't what was stopping it. And you can see it still wants to unwind, but it can't. Now, what this usually means, it actually usually means it just needs a service. Because what happens is on watches is that there's oils used to lubricate them. But here's the problem. If those oils are left unchanged, uncleaned off and replaced for years and years and years and years and years, the liquid component of the oils eventually dries and it leaves a gunky, dry deposit that actually works against the watch. In fact, it will stop it. And there's a good chance that that's what we're dealing with here, as the watch does seem to want to be able to go, but just is, for lack of a better term, it's gunked up. It won't fully be able to unwind. I will say I hope that that's the case, because that would mean no replacement parts are needed and the troubleshooting aspect kind of goes away. You just clean everything, lubricate it, put it back together and see if it runs, but we shall see. Okay, we can take the crown wheel and the ratchet wheel off, and that'll reveal the rest of the train of wheels, so I can take those out. Ooh, yeah, there's something. See, that right there could have been stopping it right there. And then look at yeah, that's not right. So that's the extended fourth wheel pivot. That's actually the pivot that the seconds hand goes onto the other side. It sticks right onto that. And that should have come out of that hole easily. And there was something, it was not bent. I looked, it's just, something was gunking it up. And that probably means dried on oil. And if that's the case, that could mean that this watch is more or less just in desperate need of a service. And it could be the reason that the watch came to a stop. This is a very basic movement from 40s, 50s, 60s range. AS is the manufacturer. It's Schild. It's German named, Swiss manufactured. They made a ton of movements from the era. I recommend these as ones to work on, though I will say that I wouldn't recommend this one. This is a 970. You can actually see it right there in the middle of the plate, stamped AS 970. I wouldn't recommend this one. The only reason I wouldn't is because it's small. This is made for a women's watch and it's very small, and that makes it harder to work on. I usually recommend starting with something like a big pocket watch movement, but even if you want to do a regular watch movement, you can get one from AS from this era off of eBay for cheap. It just, with no case or dial or hands or anything like that, but just to practice on, but just get one that's a little bit bigger than this. All right, we can flip the watch over and turn our attention to the keyless works and the motion works. These are on what they call the dial side of the watch, for obvious reason. That's where the dial used to sit. Okay, yoke spring and yoke come out, and that leaves the minute wheel and their intermediate wheel for the hand setting. And the last thing that leaves us with is the mainspring coming out of the barrel. Now, I am curious to see if the mainspring's broken. It clearly had some left in it, but one thing that can happen is it can break and still be able to wind up a little tiny bit. And that doesn't look broken. It's definitely old. If you notice the purplish blue hue to it, that means that it's a carbon steel mainspring, which is before they came out with much better engineered versions. But these work fine too, as long as they don't break. It's just that they're much more brittle than their modern counterparts, and they do break somewhat frequently. But this one, no, it's all in one shape. Yeah, this looks good. I can reuse this spring actually too. I don't think I need to reorder a new one. And it looks pretty clean in the barrel too. Take a look on the microscope at some of the parts. And the first thing you'll notice, of course, is that there's just a lot of dirt. It's just caked on dirt, you know, from age, a little bit of misthreading there. Here's some of the jewels for the plates. And they just have, well, like I said, you know, dried on oil just sitting right there on it. And that type of stuff will eventually stop it. Now, here's that fourth wheel that I showed, or that I talked about before. And do you see those rings of dark along the pivot there? That's dried on oil. And as you can see, it actually even makes it a different size because it's there. And that's really all it takes to stop a watch. Okay, it's time to put the watch in the watch cleaning machine. And as I do, I want to remind you that I have a Patreon for this channel, and this is really how the channel's supported. I really appreciate everybody over on the Patreon who supports me. If you do sign up, you get a thank you card and a Wristwatch Revival sticker in the mail. You can put on your laptop or your water bottle, or maybe one of your watchmaking parts, something like that. I particularly want to thank Trevor, Spencer, Ross, Robert, Ralph, NT, Mitchell, Michael, Mikey, Kyle, Kim, Kevin, Jim, Jason, James, George, Erica, Dustin, Dominic, David, Corey, Colin, Brinton, Brian, Brett, Brad, and Alex for their support over on the Patreon. It really does mean the world to me. And if you're interested, it's patreon.com/wristwatchrevival. You get some early access to a little bit of the content. I actually put the rough cuts of these videos up so you can see them usually a day or two before they go up in their kind of almost final form. At any rate, thank you for considering that, as of course these videos are quite labor and time intensive. As we work our way through the watch cleaning machine here, you can see I've already put it through the cleaning solution, and then there's 2 rinses, and these are kind of ammonia based, so they really do take off anything that's left over before finally working our way to the final stage, which is actually just a heated dry. All this is just a simple electric heater, and then you slowly spin the basket in there, and that drives off any of the solution that might be left over, you know, between plates or anything like that. It is a little hot when you take it out of the basket, so I'm just going to use a paper towel just to get a grip here so that I don't burn my fingers on the top there, but it looks like we're good to go. And while we're over here, let's get this case cleaned up as well. I'm going to put these in the Ultrasonic cleaner. Ultrasonic cleaner is a really indispensable tool for a watchmaker for cleaning really everything, including the movement. Sometimes if the movement's really bad, I'll do a run in the Ultrasonic as well. The cool part about these is that you don't actually need the harsh chemicals like we use in the watch cleaning machine. This is just it's a detergent basically. And I'm going to put the case back, the bracelet in here, and then it just runs a ultrasonic wave through the water that has a detergent in it. And it does an amazing job of being able to break off the tiny little bits and the little things that you can't get to with, you know, any other type of cleaning. As you can see, the water though, from this particular watch case has gotten I can't even see the parts in there anymore. Yikes. But we can take them out. And there's that already looks better. I haven't even rinsed it off yet. What I have to do after I take these out of here is just walk them over to the sink and just give them a rinse under cold water. That just makes sure that any of the leftover, detergent is off. Take a look at the parts though, as we have them all laid out and finished. They look beautiful now, including the bracelet and the case. So it looks like things cleaned up really well actually. And take a quick look at what these look like after the fact. So there's the before that just popped in, and you can see the after. No more bumps on that pivot, and that's because we got that dried oil off of there. Same thing here. This is with the dried oil on the jewels, and now spick and span. No problem at all with that. So this watch cleaned up beautifully, and if that was what was holding it back, we'll be good to go as far as getting the movement back together. Take a look at the bracelet here. It looks like it's in good shape. It's plated. I'm not going to do any polishing or anything on it, as it runs the risk of wiping off the plating, and then that just makes it even worse. But you know what? It cleaned up really nicely. This is a popular type of bracelet, these flex bracelets from that era. Okay, now we need to take a look though at the case. Now, first things first, the case cleaned up really nicely. The jewels look good. The diamonds are all shiny again, and it looks pretty good. This is also a plated case, so I'm not going to be doing anything crazy on the case as far as polishing goes, but this is an issue. So this is a custom crystal for a case like this. These aren't the type that you can just go online and buy. And that means, but it's also in really tough shape. It's got big scratches in it, and it's just generally fogged over, and it's going to make it so that you can't really see the dial clearly. And that's going to really ruin the whole presentation. So I need to restore this crystal, and I need to do it in a way that doesn't ruin it and doesn't risk breaking it, because I don't have a replacement and I don't know where I would get one. A little bit of pressure, but it must be done, because I can't look at that. I mean, this crystal has seen better days, let's say, and it really does need to be polished up if it's going to look good on the watch again for my aunt. So I'm going to do this kind of a hardcore way. What you can use is a liquid paste polisher. This one's actually a metal polish, but you can use any kind of low grade, polish, like nothing that cuts too hard. And I'm going to use a microfiber cloth, and I'm going to shape a piece of Rodico so that I have a good grip on the crystal itself. And I am going to go to town on this thing. I am just going to keep on working it until it's smooth and clear and looks good again, because acrylic is very workable. Like, you can get them looking good again, but it takes a lot. The other option I'd have here is to use my polishing wheel, which is my Dremel, but I'm worried that I will overdo it and not be able to recover it. Where when you do it by hand, it takes a lot longer. It's a lot slower, as you can see, but you can do it just a little tiny bit at a time and make sure that you land right where you need it to be. Still not happy with it, so I'm going to keep going. And as you can see, it takes a lot, just a lot of elbow grease. And at some point, the Rodico got some of the paste on it and it got slippery, so I took it off. Okay, now this is uncleaned, right? This just has a bunch of stuff on it, but this is already looking much, much better. And so, as is often the case when it comes to polishing, you want to do a multi-stage polish. So I'm going to do, that was my first, and this is going to be my second, and this is Polywatch. And if you know what this is, you can use this on any of your watches that have acrylic crystals to just give them a nice buff. It'll take out a little bit of the scratches as well, but it's a very fine polish paste, and would take really forever to get this thing from the condition it was in to the condition I want it to be in. But now that I've got it looking a significant amount better, I'm going to use the Polywatch as my last polish, and I'm going to hope that that gives it that nice, clean, clear luster. And oh my God, that is so much better. Look at the improvement. Now it's nice and clear. It looks great. It actually turned out beautiful, and I'm super relieved, because now this means I don't have to try to track down a brand new version of that crystal, which was going to be really, really tough. Okay, now let's turn our attention to this dial. Now, there is a lot going on with the dial. Okay, first, it's missing the 9 o'clock hour marker as well as the 10 and 2. But the 9 o'clock one was floating around in the case, so I do have it. So we should be able to address that. Also, it's worn. It's just dirty and worn, right? This watch isn't waterproof, and it hasn't been cared for in a long time. It's been, sitting in a jewelry box or whatever. So I'm going to do my normal dial treatment, which is a very light touch of just water. I do not believe that using chemicals or paints on dials is the right thing to do. I don't think that it looks better. I don't think I would have the skill set to do it anyway. So this is what I do instead. I just let the dial, I expose as much of the dial as it wants to have exposed. And in this case, yeah, it took a cleanup okay, but as you can see, that's not dirt on the dial. Those are wear marks or missing paint, so I'm not going to be able to clean those up. So let's do a quick test fit just to make sure that this thing's going to go in there, and it is. So we have this, and all we need to do is to glue it back in. So I'm going to use some jeweler's epoxy. So this is a 2-part epoxy, as you can see, equal parts of one and the other, and then you mix them together to make a glue. and I'm going to use that to glue this gemstone back into place. I am going to use an old oiler to do so. The hard part is getting the least amount of glue that you need, right? Like this is so easy to just flood this thing with glue and have it everywhere. Okay. This looks all right. It's not really spread in there quite right though. So let's get that. There we go. Getting there, getting there. There we go. Okay, so now I've got the glue in place and I can grab the gemstone and try to gently set it correctly into place. It's a little shaky, but this is very, very small work. Okay, that's not too bad. As you can see, there's a little bit of extra glue. And so I'm going to use a swab here with alcohol, isopropyl alcohol, and that'll take off any of the extra. And there we go. Looks good. So we've got that fixed up. Okay, so we're taking steps here. This thing's starting to come together. Now, I ordered a movement off of eBay because I need that screw, the one that was missing from the beginning. That's that one right there. And I got this for really cheap, but look what I noticed. It's got a dial, no case or anything, but there's these little diamonds on it, and they do resemble the ones in the watch that I'm fixing. Now, what are the chances that they're from the same supplier? It's a different watch brand, but let's just see. Oh, hey, they just pop right out. I didn't even know if I could get them off of the dial, but it looks like my tweezers will take them right out. And if they're the right size, I can just repurpose them. And then I've gotten very, very lucky because I needed this movement anyway. And the dial was just kind of a throw in. So let's see if these happen to be the same size. First thing that I'm going to do is take a piece of pegwood with some alcohol on it. And that will dissolve any leftover adhesive that may still be in that hole so that I can put some adhesive in myself like this. Although, oh no. Okay. Yeah, let's try that again. So this one is once again, has a bunch of alcohol on the tip of it, which will dissolve the glue that I did not place correctly using my, my oiler there. And now I can just blot that out. And as you can see, you can actually watch it evaporate. Alcohol evaporates very, very quickly. And it's almost gone. And there we go. It looks kind of cool when it does it. So let's try this again. I want to try to get this glue into that hole rather than just a little bit on the edge, which wouldn't have held it in place, but it's actually very tricky to do so. But that is better. That should be fine. So now I can grab one of these little diamonds and see if I can't fit it in place. And it does actually fit. Wow. Okay, so that's just super lucky. I mean, I think I had kind of resigned this thing to saying, I'm sorry, but you know, these diamonds aren't there. I was thinking about looking around to see if I could buy just like a subset of gemstone things, because these are tiny, tiny, tiny gemstones. I mean, they look huge on your screen. And by the way, look at how the dirt moves around in that oil. Isn't that weird? Kind of weird. Anyway, but I got really lucky here and got kind of a 2-for-1 off of that movement that I ordered. All right, so now this is once again prepped and ready to go. So here comes the glue for the other one. Oops. Well, let's just put this in and make sure that it wants to sit correctly here, because these diamonds are all a little bit different. They're not super uniform like you might expect today. And yes, there is a bit too much glue here, but I think it's fine. Okay, fine. I'm kidding. I don't think it's fine. I just wanted to see if it would bug you like it bugged me. And so I'm going to come back in here. The good part about this glue is that it sets up fairly quickly. And that means that I can come in and remove some of it without pulling out, you know, the glue that's actually holding it down. But it's really finicky with how small it is. Were you just going to go crazy on me if I left the glue like that? I think I would have done it too. Don't worry. Okay. And I think if no, still a little bit there. I'm going to have to come in from the other side here. This doesn't have to be perfect. Perfect is absolutely microscopic. I mean, I'm literally on a microscope here, but I don't want to leave like big chunks of glue sitting off the side. Like that seems fine to me. Okay. So that's done. The dial restoration is complete. We cleaned it. We replaced the 9 o'clock gem, and we even got really, really lucky and found replacements for the 2 and 10. So that's done. And that means it's time to start getting this movement back together. And of course, this is the most important part because we don't know if it's going to run or not. I'm feeling pretty good about it though. I'll say that, the fact that it kind of was trying to run before was a good sign. The fact that the mainspring could unwind at least a little bit is a good sign. And I'm hoping that just a good cleaning and service will get this thing back in action. First thing we do though is of course put the mainspring back in and, oh yeah. There's just these little moments in watchmaking that are just so fun. This is one of them. I just love it. So putting that, we now got the mainspring back in the barrel. And that means I can take the barrel arbor and put it back in as well. Like that. And then the barrel cap. And it looks like some of the plating is starting to come off of this barrel, which is bizarre. I've never actually seen that much of it come off. But I'm just going to leave it for now, and I'll rub off any of the additional plating off of the bottom of that if needed. Very strange, though. All right, so here's the escape wheel going in. That looks about right. Now the fourth wheel. And let's see if it... Yeah, see, that just drops right in. And before, these ones were giving me pain, right? These are the ones that I was pulling out and it was like stuck. Okay, get those pinions lined up. Third wheel time. Whoop. There we go. Okay, that's in place now, the center wheel. It's also known as the second wheel, but not the seconds wheel. So don't get those screwed up. And then before we want to start putting on plates here, I'm going to throw the setting lever screw in place because that actually sits under the plate. And so I can kick things off here with the barrel bridge. That'll hold that barrel in place. Okay, and now we can put the train wheel bridge on. Trying to get it lined up with the pivots because, well, that's what it's going to go on. This one's actually a little easier than the normal. It only has the 3 pivots, the center wheel, third wheel, and fourth wheel, as the escape wheel has its own little bridge. So that does make things just a little easier here. It does make it a little tricky to make sure that I've got it all engaged because it'll run the power down to the escape wheel, but the escape wheel is not held in by anything. So I'm just going to take it out for a second. And there we go. Now that is much, much better than what I was dealing with before. Okay, now we need to take a look though at this escape wheel bridge because it actually has a cap jewel setting on it that needs to be re-oiled. So in order to do that, we take these 2 parts apart. We have to unscrew them with little tiny baby screwdriver. And then as you can see, there's the hole right there. And by the way, that's the screw coming out of the hole there that holds that part on. And then the other part is the cap jewel. And I need to make sure that the cap jewel is cleaned and then put some of the Mobius 9010 lubricant on it before reassembling the part. This isn't something that they do now. Modern design for watchmaking doesn't have a capped jewel on the escape wheel anymore. It's just a normal pivot hole that you just oil as normal. But back in the day, they went hard, and so they made our lives a little harder. I mean, this is a much more involved process than the norm. So I'm just going to use an air blower here to make sure that any of the one dip, which is a solvent that I use, it's a watch cleaning solvent, is evaporated. And now I can put this into place and there. So I'm going to put that oil right on the jewel. And the reason I'm using a piece of Rodico here is so that I can hold it steady. This is some good stuff here, and make sure that when these meet up together, they're not sliding all around, because then that oil will actually move out of place. And so the Rodico really does a great job of kind of holding everything in place, where like here, where now I can grab my screwdriver and get these two parts back together. All right. And there we go. That's exactly how that is supposed to look. So sweet. Now we can put the escape wheel back in and then get this bridge back on top of it. And let's make sure, there we go, that that's all in. So everything's good there. And now we can move on to, well, in this case, we'll put in the click and the click spring. This is the part of the watch that makes a sound when you wind it. I think people have a misconception that when you wind up your watch, it's all those gears turning around, the bigger ones, we call them the train of wheels or the train wheels. I think people think that when they're winding their watch, those are what make the sound, the winding a watch sound, and they're not. It's actually just the teeth off of that little part that I just screwed in going on the top of the ratchet wheel. That's actually what makes the sound of a watch winding. Okay, this is a crown wheel, a little bit of HP 1300. That's also a Mobius oil. It's a synthetic. In fact, all of the oils that I use on the watch, the oils that I choose to use, are all synthetic. That is a left-hand threaded screw as well, which is something that you don't see very often. It also leads to a lot of sheared or broken screws, because if you don't remember that it screws the opposite way that you expect, well, you're going to go way too hard on it in the wrong direction. And as you might imagine, you're going to have a broken screw pretty quickly. And this one's the same. You can see I'm screwing this lefty-loosey, yet somehow it's tightening down. Okay, now we can flip the movement over and put the cannon pinion back on. Like that. And we can start working on the keyless works here as well. This blue stuff is a synthetic grease. And it's for the high friction parts on a watch. I get away with using 4 or sometimes 5 different types of greases and oils in a watch. But I'm also a hobbyist, right? And so, I assume if you're doing this full time and all that you probably have a few more that you would use for more specific applications. But I think for where I'm at with the hobby, the main 4 that I use really do serve my needs quite well. Sometimes 5. The 5th one is actually a special grease that I use on automatic watches for the winding barrel bridge. But I won't need that here because this is a manual wind, straight up wind 'em up style watch. Okay, so now we've got the keyless works coming together here. A little bit of grease here and there as I work towards putting on the yoke and the yoke spring. So just make sure that the yoke's engaged before grabbing the spring. And I'm going to use this stick to kind of stabilize everything because these are exactly the type of springs that go flying away. I've definitely had that happen. All of a sudden you've got your best flashlight and a magnet and you're down on the ground digging through the carpet. It's no fun. Okay, a little bit of grease here on the point at which the spring meets with it because that's a very high friction part. I'm a little sloppy with the grease today, so I'm just going to use this Rodico to clean it up. If I was perfect, that wouldn't happen. So I guess I got bad news. I'm not perfect. All right, setting lever goes into place, and that means that we can also do a test fit here on the winding crown. Yeah, anybody who thinks that they're, pretty darn good, try making watch repair videos. You'll find out. You'll figure out the stuff you're not so good at real quick because people will let you know. There's no doubt about it. But that's part of the thing that actually attracts me to watchmaking is that I view it as an endeavor that has a very, very high ceiling. I think it's really hard to be really, really good at this. And so I'm doing my best to get as good as I can at it, but I mean, I took classes online that were, from the watch repair channel here on YouTube from Mark. They were invaluable to me, but it's not a substitute for, 2 years at a watchmaking school or something like that. Right. I'm teaching myself most of this stuff. So I try to keep that in mind too, but still, come on, I want to be good at this. Cool part about it too, is there's always something else to learn. Okay. Minute wheel goes into place here after the intermediate, and a quick check shows that yes, it looks like the parts are all engaging here, and I can even get some grease and perhaps once again, a little too much. And I'm just going to clean that up again with the Rodico. And now I can put the setting lever spring into place. Most of the time, a setting lever spring acts as both the spring for the setting lever to engage back and forth between hand setting and winding, but it also often acts as a cover plate, which it does here, for example, for the yoke and the yoke spring. But that is what you want to see right there. You want to see it engaging and disengaging. Like that. And of course, this is another major point of friction as that has to slide across that spring over and over again. So I'm going to put some on the inside and then some once again on the inside. Really important to make sure that that's done. Not only does it make it less likely to have metal shavings and wear, it also just makes the watch a little easier to operate when it comes to pulling in and out with the setting and winding positions on the crown. Okay, that looks like it is good to go. And that means that we can kind of start working towards the moment of truth here with putting in the pallet fork. That means we're just a step or two away from getting the balance in here and seeing if we can't get this thing up and running again. Cleaned up beautifully. The movements, they just made really nice little movements for even these watches where the movement wasn't the star. You're right. This movement was never visible. The person who bought this watch probably never saw the movement ever. And look at what they did. This nice graining on it, just some nice beveling. Again, this isn't like super high horology stuff, but it's like a nice looking little movement. Okay, so let's get this pallet fork into place. Eventually. There we go. And after a little wind, you can see that the pallet fork is operating correctly. It wants to jump back and forth, and that means we can put in this balance. Let's see what we got. Really hoping this thing just jumps to life. Not yet. Oh, it wants to. Maybe it's just not engaged properly. You can tell it's trying. Huh. Well, if I use my air blower here, I can make it engage and kind of go, but it just kind of keeps dragging to a stop. It doesn't want to keep going for some reason. Huh. Okay, well, I guess the first thing we should do then is we still haven't actually cleaned and lubricated the jewels on the top here. So let's just do that, and that might let us know, because this thing is very, very close to working, but it just doesn't quite want to go. So in order to do this on these non-shock protected, it is a pain. You actually have to take the whole balance and balance spring assembly off of the balance bridge like this, and then set it aside. And then you have to, these two tiny little screws on the bottom, and these hold together 4 parts. The bridge thing itself, the jewel, the screws, of course, and then also the lever for the regulation of the watch. They're all kind of one unit here. So there's the screws. There's the bridge itself with the hole. There's the lever. And then this is the cap jewel. So this is very finicky, because what I need to do now is clean these parts up and then do a similar operation to what we did for the escape wheel, where I'm going to put some oil on this cap jewel that's going into the one dip right here. And then I have to put this all back together without mixing them up or smooshing it around. So this is, yeah, this isn't the super fun part of it. They made this a lot more finicky. Well, now that we have the shock settings, it's way easier. Okay, there's the cap jewel fresh out of the one dip. As you can see, it evaporates very quickly. And I'm going to use some pegwood just to make sure that there's no crusted on oil, because I could still see some even after sitting in the one dip for a little bit. And we'll give it just another quick splash. And there we go. Now the jewel's nice and clean. Interestingly as well, on some parts here, they used clear jewels rather than the deep red ones that we have. They're actually the same, structurally. They just, you can add an element to it to make them that deep red. You can even make them blue. Synthetic ruby, synthetic sapphire. They're all technically synthetic sapphire, but you can change the colors on them or have no color. You can do that now too. There's a few watch companies that do it, but it's rare. So as you can see, I need to really make sure that I hold this thing together while I get these little, these screws are so small. And this is, I believe, my smallest screwdriver. Okay, but it's coming back together. There we go. So with that done, now I can put the balance assembly back into place. So that means that the stud, the balance spring stud, needs to go into that hole. Then I can secure it with that screw. And then I also need to make sure that the regulating arm has the correct part of the spring in it before I turn it back over on an eccentric screw. So this is very touchy, tiny work. Yeah, so this just screws over and then holds the last outer ring of that spring in place like so. Okay, so we did that. And now we can give this another shot and see if we can get it going. No? Give it a good wind. Maybe that'll kick it up. You do need to wind up the watch, and if you give it a full wind, it actually has more power than when it doesn't. And it's sitting correctly. It's just hanging or not wanting to go. Well, let's take a look at the other side of the balance jewel. So you can see that this is also capped. And is there something? Is that actually a piece of metal I think that that's actually a broken off pivot from a balance, maybe? There it is. I finally got it. I couldn't get it with the tweezers, but that was stuck in the between the cap jewel and the hole. So I'm thinking that that's what the problem was and why it still could kind of go, but couldn't go. And let's see if we can get this thing running now. Come on, baby. Okay. Oh, there it goes. Oh, that is what you wanted to see. All right. So some troubleshooting and some kind of weirdness there of having that thing broken off in between those two jewels. But that was the problem. The watch needed to be cleaned and it needed that little tiny piece of metal taken out. And now it kicks right up to life. So let's see how it's doing on the Timegrapher. Okay. So it's losing about 10 seconds a day. The amplitude's about 200, which is okay. Now the beat error is pretty bad, but that doesn't actually affect timekeeping and it's very finicky to correct. So I'm not going to. That actually is totally fine for a watch of this age and this condition. You know, 10 seconds a day isn't great if you're looking at like modern watch timekeeping, but for something like this isn't going to be a daily wear. This is going to be a special occasion at best type thing for my aunt. So I am going to totally be happy that we got this thing running again, and we'll proceed to the final assembly now. So one thing that we're going to need to do with our restored crystal is we need to put it back in. It doesn't actually click into place or have a way to be set into place with pressure like the ones that we use now. These were actually glued in. And I had to scrape off a bunch of the glue here, but I've got some crystal sealant. And yeah, we're going to glue this bad boy in here. This is how they did it back then for these kind of odd-shaped crystals. Okay, so just a thin layer of glue on the top or bottom, and we can put the crystal back into place. I'm just going to hold my finger on it for a couple of minutes to make sure that the crystal or that the glue is spread out and that it sets up properly and that everything goes well. But frankly, I'm just thrilled that this thing's running again and is going to be back in service. Here's the hour hand going on. There we go. And you can see the dial with all of its shiny jewels. This watch is way different than what we normally work on the channel, but I have to say it was kind of fun working on such a kind of a fancy piece. Here's the minute hand going on. And just a quick check to make sure that the hands aren't bumping into any of these gemstones and that they're holding up fine. Now the seconds hand can go on. It's tiny, but there we go. And that, of course, means that we can put the case back together. This actually just clicks like that. And there we go. We have the watch completely reassembled and running and back together. And we have breathed new life into this very old watch. Now we can go ahead and get the bracelet put back on, and that'll kind of finish the job for this Swiss Geneva 17 jewels watch that is a family heirloom of my aunt. And I can't wait to give it back to her. Take a look at this thing out in the sunlight. It's kind of pretty. I even wore it around for a couple of days just to give it a good test, make sure that everything stayed in place and that it was running. And I don't know, not my normal style, I'll say that, but it was kind of fun to wear it. It's so flashy and crazy. Well, anyway, thank you so much for joining me for this restoration of this really cool watch with a lot of style and a lot of charm. I appreciate you taking the time. If you want to catch up with me on Instagram, I post some project updates and stuff, some watches from my collection over there. It's wristwatch_revival. I want to thank you for taking the time to hang out with me, and we'll see you next time.